Good morning, everyone, and greetings from Shanghai. As I noted the other day in a video, I thought it would be a good idea, especially given a lot of questions I've received via email, direct messaging, and the like, regarding the state of the American presidential election vis-a-vis positions that are being taken on China. Now, clearly, with the recent stepping down of Joe Biden for re-election and Kamala Harris taking his spot, I don't think it's clear exactly what Vice President Harris has in terms of position on China. But what I wanted to do was address what I would call political realities, geopolitic, in how comments made on the political trail, especially with regard to China, typically, or at least historically, have never genuinely been followed through when it comes to action taken either at the executive or the legislative branch in America. Now, I'll return in a minute to the quoted title about Tyrants from Baghdad to Beijing. Be interesting to see how many of you that do watch this actually recall that comment. I very much remember it. But where we are right now, at least on the Republican side, is a doubling down, if you will, of the original Trump rhetoric from 2016 through the tariffs and the trade war in 2018. We've seen, of course, Donald Trump coming out unilaterally saying he wants to slap 60% tariffs on all imported goods from China. And now he has as his vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, genuinely taking an even far more hawkish view on China that I will simply encapsulate with the quote, "I don't like China." Now, J.D. Vance has made a series of comments over the years with regard to what he thinks about China. They're not very helpful, but we can see that in a world where there are very few certainties in life, the one that we can expect between now and at least the election in early November is going to be increased rhetoric directed towards China, probably by both parties. Now, this then brings me to the title of the video. In fact, the title of the video should have been Coddling Tyrants from Baghdad to Beijing. This was infamously stated by President Clinton when he was accepting the Democratic nomination back in 1992. And it was in response, if you will, to how the previous Bush administration had been engaging with China. And what I find fascinating, and I've always found fascinating, is the relationship that Bill Clinton, throughout his 8 years in the presidency, had with China. It began clearly with very lofty goals, and by no means am I attempting to delve into politics, if you will, geopolitics. But when President Clinton originally came into office, China at the time had an annual review called Most Favored Nation, where there was a bunch of debates within Congress and elsewhere that there needed to be an agreement every year on whether or not the United States would continue to allow China to trade and export into the American markets. And Bill Clinton, when he became president in 1993, put out a very important executive order in which he had said two things. Well, he said a lot of things in that very lengthy executive order, but most importantly was that he was going to extend MFN to China for a single year, but that by 1994 it was going to be predicated on whether or not there were going to be improvements. They were not really clearly defined, but improvements in China's human rights record, so that in 1994 they would make the decision whether or not they should include MFN again for China. Well, I think as we all now know that by 1994, the entire ideology that Clinton had fell completely apart. Not only did most favored nation status be provided to China yet again, but there was at that point a delinking with trade in China with human rights. Now, fun fact is that in the original executive order, one of the primary issues and concerns that President Clinton had laid out was that China was operating with an $18 billion trade surplus annually with the United States. $18 billion. China's trade surplus with the United States today is more than $18 billion on a monthly basis. I had to look it up, but last year the entire trade surplus between China and the United States was 280 billion US dollars. But it doesn't end there, because what ultimately occurred, I won't go into the whole issue surrounding the Third Taiwan Strait crisis of 1996, but we went from having a president who, with very strong and I think ideologically held goals of, holding China's feet to the fire, whether it was on not just human rights, but issues such as technology transfers or intellectual property theft or what have you, issues we continue to still hear today, and I suspect we're going to hear over the course of the incoming election cycle. Bill Clinton ultimately left office having ushered China into the WTO. It was in November of 1999 that the United States and China reached a bilateral agreement to provide China with the necessary path to be able to enter the World Trade Organization. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. So I think it is very mindful that while we go through the coming 4 months or so up until the election, that there's going to be an enormous amount of rhetoric, most likely anti-China rhetoric, on headlines, across television, commentators, you name it. And while I think a discourse over how China should be viewed by the American government in terms of its competitive nature, in terms of sort of the clear shift in the international rules-based order, it is also very important to be mindful that what we have seen in the past is what we should expect to see in the future. And that is political rhetoric that will continue to move in one direction, but that when push comes to shove, will any of that rhetoric actually make its way through in terms of legislation, in terms of executive orders, or the like? It's not to say this time may not be different, but I do believe that it is important to take politicians and their rhetoric during a political cycle and on a political trail with a rather large grain of salt. So those are my points today. I hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and I'll share some more videos on issues that will be popping up in the coming days and weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.